There's something in my throat. But I can't talk properly.
That's a great way to start. Alright.
Oh.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tim Von Rieden with ConceptCookie.com, and I'm joined by Deandra Pop. And today we're going to be doing part 3 of our live stream that we've been doing for the whole month of May. And this is part 3 where I'm going to take you through how to color an image that is mostly done in grayscale. So if we can remember from last week, we did Grizzy, the character, but we started to kind of define her facial features. And today I'm going to take you through how I would go about coloring it. So I'm going to go ahead and get my layout all set up. And as always, we have the questions on the side. Deandra is going to be taking a look at them and trying to pick them out so that I'm not constantly going back and forth between what I'm drawing and looking at the comments anymore. So always feel free to leave your questions there. And even if it doesn't particularly relate to the live stream at hand, it could be anything about concept art, digital art, anything that you may want answered. So I'm going to go ahead and switch screen here. And Deandra, if you want to say hi.
Hello. I'm
Okay.
Deandra.
Deandra is also the one that is going to be taking over the art book reviews. So if you have any, maybe even suggestions on what books you would like to see us to do, feel free to add that as well. Alright, so here's my screen right now. This is where we left off last time. And I'm going to go ahead and take off those bottom bars. And I know that you guys can't see any of my tools or any of the actual layout of Photoshop, but pretty much going to be using a chalk brush for most of this. And I'm going to be using a few different layer modes, but I'll explain them as I go about doing them. Okay, so right now I'm going to make a new layer. And to color this, a lot of people would either just color right over or they would use what is known as a layer mode. And the layer mode I'm going to be choosing for this is color. So on the drop down under the layers, I'm going to choose color. And then let's say, to kind of show you guys a better example of what that does, if I grab like a really bright red, you can see how some of the values are still in place, but for the most part, the picture itself is obviously like a neon strawberry color. But if I chose something that was more skin toned, so let me go ahead and grab that from my color picker. Ooh, and even that's a little too yellow. Let me make it a little more red. So as I lay that out, you can see how it retains all of the value, and it may edit the saturation a little bit. And if you don't want the saturation edited, you would choose the hue layer mode instead of color. So what color does is it will affect, well, what it says, the color, but it also will affect your saturation. So it affects your saturation and your hue. So usually what I like to do is I'll lay down kind of base colors to work from. So let's say her hair, because right now it's that very dark, muted red color that I chose to do all the value work in. But let's say I wanted to make it kind of a very, I want to say almost no color gray. I can lay that right on top. And pretty much what this will do is this will give me a foundation to work the colors on top of. And even with her clothes, I can change, let's say this was more brown. And the frill that's around her neck area here. So even though I chose like a really light white, and I know you guys can't see that, so let me go ahead. I'll make a new layer. So this is the color, oops. Gotta hide that. Okay, so this is the color that I'm using right now. And you can see as I apply it on my layer mode that has it set to color, it retains that very dark value that I initially drew on when I did the sketch. I'm going to flip the image, see what it looks like from this side. And for the most part, I'm only going to be focusing on the bust area up, so like a profile shot of her. I'm not going to worry so much about the wardrobe, because detailing for me sometimes takes a little longer, especially when I get into this phase of where I'm doing, I zoom in once, but that's not to say I want to zoom in too much, because I feel if you zoom in too much, you're going to be over detailing and you're kind of limiting your focus to a particular area. So I'm going to keep going here, and I'll do, let's say, probably like this area right here. Give her a headband of color here. Ooh, not that saturated. So in a lot of this live stream, we'll also go through doing skin tones and how you could do it this way. Because I know a lot of people that are not the biggest fan of color, they usually really struggle with skin because they don't know how to add in the different flesh tones. So this is one way that you can go ahead and do that. So now that we have kind of our base foundations, I guess, laid in place, let's go ahead and make a new layer on top of this one. And literally I'm going to be painting right on top of it. So I know a few people might do like another overlay or multiply layer to give it some more like color to it, more life. Actually, I could go ahead and do that. I could give it an overlay layer just to give like the undertones of the skin, so like the cheeks and the nose, and maybe a little bit on the lip. And change the opacity of that layer really low. So sometimes I like to lay it out pretty heavy at first and then just change the layer's opacity. So right now it's at 42. I'm going to change it to about 26. Because it's that subtle variation of color in the skin tones that'll give it that believability factor. Because if you make it a flat color all around, that's what's going to kind of take you out of it looking realistic, and it's going to start to look more flat. So you can see as I turn that layer on and off, the difference that starts to make it. So now I'm going to go ahead and make a new layer, and we're going to paint right on top. So right now, there isn't really that much of a contrast between the skin, the hair, and the clothes region. And contrast is what will direct the viewer's eye to different areas of the piece. So for me, I usually like to have the focus be somewhere around the eye area, almost centralized on the face itself. So I'm going to go ahead and lighten up the face, especially since the hair is very dark in its value. So having a very light skin color, it'll just emphasize the focus here. And as I'm doing this, for the most part, I'm doing a very general pillow shading, but I'm having there be a slight hint of a light source. And right now I'm using both my Cintiq and my tablet. And this was a suggestion that I was given from my friend Puichi, or Puiche I should say. And he uses it, or I don't believe if he does this, but I'm using the Cintiq as my tablet, but then whenever I'm doing focused areas where like line work or areas that I need to really concentrate on forming intricate detail, I'll look down and use it as a Cintiq. So it's one thing you guys can do if you have a Cintiq, which I know most people would just use a tablet. And I don't even say that a Cintiq is recommended. It may help a little bit, but for the most part you can do anything and feel just as confident on a regular tablet.
Do you use two monitors?
Currently, I only use one. My parents got me a second monitor for my birthday, but I found that it made it too much for me. And I don't know if it's just because I worked on a laptop all through my college experience, but I'm really used to only working on one screen. So, yeah, currently I only use one screen. Or one monitor, I should say. Now, something else that I usually don't do, but especially after watching some of these tutorials that we've gotten in for Concept Cookie for the summer, the big summer plan that we have, one artist said that you shouldn't over detail and like focus on one area for too long, and that you should stay consistent throughout. And that's something that I've kind of taken to heart, as I tend to like detail the like first. So I would definitely, like right now, I'd probably go in, make the eyes look really nice, and then move to another area that I really like. And that was kind of my process. But it was interesting to hear her talk about how she feels she works better in not only more consistent, but more efficient when she works around the piece constantly. And now here I'm kind of like edging out the wrinkles, so I'm making them more defined. And I'm trying to really show her age. And like I said in the last stream, I usually don't draw uh, this type of aged character, but it's kind of fun. But at the same time, I want to be looking at references and making sure I'm staying as true to the forms as possible, or else it'll look like I've never done wrinkles before, and that's the way it'll come across. And right now, this skin color is actually pretty dark, so I want to be pulling in a lighter skin color so I can make these pop a bit more. I'm going to do this on a new layer just in case I think it looks to be a bit too much. Especially when I'm adding such a lighter color, I want to be careful that I don't make it look too clown face, and that's where it starts to look like you're painting on actual paint on top of the skin tones. So I want to make sure that I'm blending it in so that it looks like it's a part of the flesh, not painted on top. I know this is the first stream where we're not getting questions in constantly, which is ironic since I finally got someone to help me out. So you can see how, like, on the face, I'm still a bit too timid on laying out the skin tone as much as I should be, and that's a problem. So I need to break away from being scared and lay it on thicker. Because on the chest area, that's kind of the brightness that I want the skin at. So I got to make sure that is reflected in the face as well. And I'm constantly color picking from the colors that I've already laid down in the piece. And that's to stay consistent in the harmony of the color palette. And that way when you add a bunch of new colors after you've laid down a bunch of your colors, sometimes that may be too much, or you might be adding too many colors and they may start to end up clashing with each other. So I try to stay with the original colors that I choose as much as possible, and then just pick them up and relay them down.
What's your light source again?
What's my light source?
You said pillow shading and...
Oh, I guess for those that don't understand what pillow shading is, it's a term that pretty much means there isn't a set light source, but pretty much you shade something from the center of it, and then you pillow out to the edges. So you do like a soft, almost gradient to the edge, and that's called pillow shading. And that's used a lot of times in just pure concept art, and I like to use it because I liked having the very standard three-quarter pose, nothing too crazy or dynamic. But usually there's a hint of a light source that's indicated from some direction. So even for this character here with Grizzy, the light source is coming somewhat from an overhead lighting direction. And you can kind of tell that because I'm adding shadow underneath the neck. So there's like a slight indication of a light source, but for the most part it's fantastical, which means it's not so much a realistic lighting, but it's lighting that tries to make the character look good. which I know sounds counterproductive, especially when you're trying to, when you're focusing on lighting so much. But sometimes you just got to remember that you also want it to look like a great piece, regardless of if the lighting looks 100% accurate. And I know someone asked before the stream, do I still make 3D art? And no, I don't. So I would love to maybe do some sculpting in ZBrush and learn some of those techniques, but for the most part, I stick pretty strictly to concept and digital art.
Will you be adding a background of any sorts, Tim?
I may. It'll probably be pretty basic to the point where it's just highlighting the character or maybe even separating the silhouette from the background. But for the most part, I keep my backgrounds pretty simple. And that's not to say that's right or wrong, but I think I try to keep mine looking more concept artish rather than illustrative, just to save time, really, and because I feel more comfortable doing it. I'm going to zoom out a little bit, see what we're looking at here.
I think when you want to showcase a design, it's best to like keep the background simple. Just keep the focus on the character. Why aren't you doing 3D modeling anymore, Tim?
Time. I guess that's the short answer. And it's not to say I still don't enjoy 3D modeling. Like, I loved it in school. It's just time. So I notice that usually when I'm working faster and I'm kind of breezing through, like even with this bandana area, I'm usually more loose, and that'll create, usually it'll create more interesting shapes and layouts. Where with the face, I'm very hesitant, and you can almost tell that I'm moving slower, and that's not a good thing, because then I'm hesitant because I'm scared of it not turning out right. So sometimes you just need to push through and be like, okay, just work faster even if you're not sure how it'll look out. Especially when you're not in like the rendering phase yet. Because once you get to that final stage, you should have all your foundations laid out underneath, and literally the only thing you should be focusing on is making it look and rendered as pretty as possible. And I'm not going to try to add too much highlights at this point because we're so early, but I do want to add a bit more of a value contrast because it's still looking a bit flat for my taste. I'll round her out just a little bit more. I'll zoom in a little more so you guys can see it clearly on the stream here. So here's a great example of where you can cut in something and it'll make it look a bit cleaner. So the area where the bandana and the skin meet, there's a solid red line. And initially that might be like a line art or something just to indicate that this is where the bandana ends, that's where the skin begins. But everything in real life doesn't really have an edge to it that is defined by a line. So I'm going to kind of butt up this bandana and the skin right up against each other and then blend it in to each of the different tones. Because that'll give a much more realistic look to the piece, if that's what you're going for too. I always try to tell people I don't teach style so much as I try to teach the fundamentals for you guys to go on and develop your own style. Because I think your own style comes from your own tastes and what you enjoy. Like for me, I don't really enjoy line art so much, so I usually tend to gravitate towards artists and art that don't have line art. But that's not to say I wouldn't teach people not to do line art, because there's a whole community that love to use line art, and that's the style that they want to use. Okay, and I'm going to really try to define and separate the eye from the skin folder. There we go. It's already feeling a little better to me. Give her a pupil. So I'm definitely working with very muted, unsaturated colors. So if I wanted to add focus to any area in this piece, if I added just a little saturation to almost anywhere, it would really kind of draw your attention and isolate it to that area. So if I wanted her to have like red lipstick, that would definitely draw your attention, just because there's nothing else as demanding around the area.
Why do you like wearing a headband?
Why what?
Why do you like wearing headbands?
Oh, me personally?
Yeah.
To control the fro. The first time I've ever let my curly hair just kind of grow out, and I'm learning that sometimes it is crazy, so I just put on a headband to kind of keep it down, I guess. Otherwise, I might look pretty homeless, and since I live with my parents right now, I don't want to scare them. Okay, so now I think I'm going to get into. Oh, actually, this is a great example of, just like I said with where her forehead meets the bandana or whatever is wrapped around her head. I could do the same thing for the frill. So I'm going to grab that skin color and lay it on. I'm going to put the pressure on the tablet as hard as I can so that I get no opacity. I'm going to create that solid edge of where the frill kind of, I guess, in essence, it meets up with the skin, but it should look like it's, on top of the skin, and it's not a part of it. And I could even grab this color and just work my way down, give the frill some more detail. All right, so now I think I've held off on detailing the eye long enough. And you can see what that layer looks like on and off. So her skin might be a little too light for me. Let's see if I turn that opacity down. Somewhere around there.
Yeah, that looks good.
What?
I like that. I
Yeah,
think
I think it was a bit too bright before. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and detail this eye a bit more. I'm going to see what that looks like on the stream. Okay, you guys can see that. Okay. So this is kind of like the foundation that I usually come up with when I start a character. I try my best not to detail it until I get to this point. And I contradict myself sometimes when I say don't zoom in, because for faces, I find myself zooming in for the face. And I think partially is because I really enjoy working on the face. So for me, like, and I guess for a lot of artists, you'll notice areas that you kind of, or not regret, but like you're kind of bored working on. And then there's areas that you're excited, and, it gets you more actively into the painting. So for me, doing the face usually gets me excited about working on it. So I think that's why I still zoom in on the face, but I usually won't zoom in on other areas nowadays. So I'm still imagining that her eye, since it's this heavy lid, and then her eyelashes is going to be casting a shadow over the eye. So you can kind of see that there. I don't want to make it too heavy, but heavy enough where you can definitely tell there's a shadow being casted from the upper lid and the eyelashes.
How often do you use your hotkeys?
Every 3 seconds. So I would say my control and option, and that's on a Mac. If you hold control and option, that resizes your brush. And I'm doing that constantly. And if you've ever seen one of my live streams before, it's always pick up a color, resize the brush, and then lay it down.
Well,
Or
not
no,
just the
what?
ones on your keyboard, but what about like on your tablet or Cintiq?
Oh, on the Cintiq, I would
Mhm.
say rare, very, very rare. And I think that's because I'm so used to using the keyboard shortcuts that I never have a need to use the tablet ones. As long as your left hand is positioned to be doing something, I think it doesn't matter if you're using the buttons on the Cintiq or if you're using the buttons on the keyboard. So here I'm just adding a slight highlight inside of the eye. I'm going to draw in some of that exposed muscle tissue on the inside here without making it too noticeable. And that area would also have a bit of a shine. So I really want to make sure I make this under skin fold where it's under her eye. I want to make that as accurate as possible. So right now on my laptop, I have some references pulled up of I just typed in elderly and elderly face. So I'm looking at the way that their skin is sagging down, but you can also see some of the pocket that the skull has for the eye, and it kind of encases that. So I want to zoom out and make sure it looks all right. And like I said, since this is the first time I've really drawn older person, I want to be using reference and I want to make it look as accurate as possible. And like I said in the last stream, you don't want to be thinking of reference as cheating. The only way that I consider it as cheating is if you literally take the photo, copy it into Photoshop, and draw over it. I feel like that, in a sense, taking someone else's work and just making it your own. But if you're looking at it, you're analyzing it, and you're kind of breaking it down into, okay, this is how the form works on this picture. How can I make it work on my picture using that same form?
Will you be blending her skin tone further?
Maybe. I want to say yes a little bit. I'm also going to leave it have this kind of a chalky appearance. I think it's just something I've enjoyed more where I don't constantly try to make it look perfect and blend everything everywhere. And leaving it at this kind of chalky state eases my OCD with that a bit. But I think I will add some more colors everywhere because right now, like even the forehead, it's looking pretty flat because I only have that one color and then a highlight color that's blended in.
How do you imagine shapes so well without line art?
How do I what?
Imagine like shapes so well if you don't like to use line art.
How do I imagine shapes so well?
Like
Uh,
how do you paint without it? Without like that outline?
I would say usually I do create some sort of really sketchy outline first, so it's usually not anything worthwhile. It just kind of gives me a sense of where the shaping would be. So even with Grizzy, when we started out, we did that kind of really sketchy silhouette, but that was enough information for me to be able to interpret how the shapes would reflect light and where the values would go. And I think just practice. The more that you do it, the more comfortable you'll be. And after a while, you'll be able to skip certain stages not because you're trying to rush it, but because it's already so ingrained in your head that you don't need to do it anymore. Let me see what that looks like from farther away. All right, so yeah, that's starting to get the look that I wanted to get with her. Now I want to capture it on the other side. So this is definitely the downfall of zooming in, because sometimes you may like the way it looks zoomed in, but then you zoom out and you're not liking or digging it as much. So that's why a lot of artists even recommend just never zoom in. And even with this one, I would probably stay zoomed out, but I also wanted to have you guys see what I'm doing more clearly since I'm working on such a small scale. And because, like I said earlier, I really like working on faces, so it's kind of a double excuse for me to be able to zoom in.
Do you paint light skin differently from dark skin?
Yes. So I would say with light skin, I try to integrate more red hues, where dark skin, I'll either try to integrate more purple or more brown hues. Okay, now let's get this nose kind of roughed out. So I don't want to give her a pretty nose by any means. So one thing that I'll try to do with nose is I'll try to make the underside just like a few shades darker than the topper side, or the upper side, and that's just to give it that contrast, and it gives it that value shaping to it. And I used to be very like definitive of like this is where the nostril ends and this is where the skin begins. But lately I've kind of let that blend in a bit more, and I'll usually put more emphasis on the ridge of the nose and the nostril area rather than the actual line of where the nostrils end. I think for the nose I'm going to stay zoomed out a bit more. So I would say the eyes I really enjoy working on, but then the other facial features like the nose and the lips and the ears, I usually don't attend to them as much. And it's just personal preference. But for me, I can stay zoomed out probably on these other areas. And then her eyebrows I want to lighten up.
A new color palette.
What?
Somebody asked, are you realizing a new color palette?
Am I realizing a new color palette?
Yeah.
Maybe, yeah. Because I'm definitely not working with any color palette right now. I'm just kind of winging it a little bit. Now for her lips, I might make another new layer, and that's when I'll do another color layer mode. So I'm going to grab sort of this pink color, lay it on top. And let's say that that's a bit too saturated for me. I can open my hue and saturation menu with Command U, and I could even change the color of the hue if I want. So I could even make her lips blue if that's really what I was going for. I'm going to go ahead and make them a bit softer and a little less saturated. So if I do Command Z, you can see the difference. So this is a good example of where I'm going to combine all the layers and do a quick liquify pass because I feel the nose is pushed down too far. So I'm going to go ahead and use my liquify filter, which is in Photoshop. And I don't believe it is in like Paint Tool SI or any of the other softwares that I'm aware of. But it's a nice one where you can really push and move just ever so slightly what you already have established. Choose OK. So you can see the difference of before and after. That's kind of the nose that I wanted to go with more so than the long one. So sometimes it's a lot of just guessing and testing and figuring out what area you like, what things you don't like about the character, and really just making the character feel like the personality is apparent. So I'm trying to make it look as much as I can like the image I see her in my head. Give her some of those lip wrinkles. Oops, there we go. Oh yeah, make sure you save periodically. Something I tend to forget. And especially if you have the newer version of Photoshop, CS6, it has an autosave, so every 5 minutes it'll give you a backup file that you can choose from in case in case like Photoshop crashes or your computer crashes. So that's a really nice feature that I like about Photoshop. Okay, now I'm going to make a multiply layer, and I'm going to add some red hues to the top of this upper eyelid, because just from the reference that I'm looking at right now, it seems like there's a heavier focus of reds on top here. Now first I'm going to go to my system preferences and turn the firmness up on my pen so I can press down lighter and it won't give as as solid as the color down. So here I'm going to first lay it out pretty thick, and then like what I've done with other things is then I'm going to turn the layer's opacity down. And the great thing about overlay and multiply layers is that they won't affect the values, so everything underneath will stay in place, but they'll change the way the colors interact. So there we go. I'm going to change the layer's opacity to 44%. And you can see the difference before and after. So just little solid color additions like that will help out your piece look a little less flat. And even for her, I might just dab on some color in areas just to liven up the skin. And sometimes there's no rhyme or reason, or I couldn't even tell you the reasoning behind why I'm doing some things. Sometimes you just gotta let the art side of your mind take over and not be so methodical about it. And that was one of the best tutorials I watched from Psychra about letting your intuition flow out rather than being analytical about things. So there doesn't have to be a method for everything. You don't have to follow a procedure. And if it was always just following a procedure, you might even get bored. And you always want to enjoy your craft and what you're working on. And I actually kind of like that her lips seem to have a purple tint to them. And that was accidental, but I'm kind of liking it. And those are some kind what people call those happy accidents in digital art. And if you hear either I or Deandra sniffling a little bit, it was because at the ACEN we were at or the convention we were at over the weekend, it seems a bunch of us caught something, and now we caught like a cold or some runny nose. And the reason that I bring that up is because at the end of this live stream, I'll show you a piece that I bought from an artist that I've admired for so long, and she's actually doing a tutorial for us over the summer. And her name's Melissa Herring, but she's better known to the art community as Purple Kekleon. So I was able to meet her, talk to her for a while, and I got one of her prints. So I'll show you guys what that is. Now for her face, I kind of like that these strokes right here almost look like there's underlying vein breakage, and sometimes that happens with older people where the veins become more apparent. So like even if I zoom in, I could maybe even draw in one a little bit. And I know there's a specific term for this, but it's where the veins become very apparent on the surface and they are very broken up. And I try to add that feature, especially for her, just to give her some more age, give the skin some more years behind it. Now for the wrinkles on the side, because right now she's still looking a bit younger than I would want. So I'm going to add just a few more wrinkles on the side of her face, give it some more sagging.
Are you planning on applying any battle scars?
What?
Are you gonna plan on like adding any scars?
Any scars?
Yeah.
Yes, that's actually a really good idea. Yeah, I think I will. Let's just do one right across the eye like that. I think I'm going to try to be a little more about where I add these scars. And I sometimes cringe when I see new pieces that have either scars across the eye or ones that are directly on the nose. I think if you really want to make a believable scar, put it somewhere that looks like they were in battle and it was unexpected, and that's where they got hit or slashed. So for scars, I try to maybe add a little hint of red here and there, but for the most part, I try to make them just look like hardened skin. So for her, it's going to be a little more difficult to see on her because of how many wrinkles she has on her face. But I'm going to go back circle brush. I'm going to try to do it this way. So usually I'll give kind of an indentation of the skin, so I'll make it darker, and then I'll choose a lighter skin color, and then I'll just highlight a little bit near the edges. And usually what the goal behind that is to pop up the skin as if there was a ridge. I'm trying not to overdo it because then that can almost put too much attention to the scar. If we're trying to be more subtle about it, I don't want to overdo it. Something like that. And now that I'm zoomed in, I want to work on the eyebrow a bit more. And you'll find yourself jumping around a lot. And I actually think that's a good thing. Artists usually, or not artists in general, but there are some people that ask me, is it okay that my mind is constantly wandering from one piece or area to the next? Is it because I'm bored, or do I have ADD? And I think it's because your mind will register there's an area that you could fix on, and it wants to fix it right away. So if your mind wants to fix it, why not let it go ahead and do it? If it's fresh in your mind, just go ahead and do it. There's no reason why you 100% need to stay in the exact same area until you finish it and then move on to the next. I almost kind of like the idea of her eyebrows thinning out near the top significantly. I'm gonna zoom out and see what that looks like. So yeah, she definitely has some age to her right now. And she's still borderlining on pirate, which I'm not fully invested in yet. I still want to add some things to kind of stray that path a little bit, but I have a feeling it's going to end up most likely going down that path, and I'll just have to be okay with it.
I kind of like the idea of her being like a gypsy or something.
Yeah, I like that idea much more than a sky pirate. I guess what kind of a weapon, I don't know if you have any on the top of your mind, but like what kind of a weapon would a gypsy type elderly woman have?
Um, hmm,
I know, right?
a
Because obviously, like the
bat?
first references would be a musical instrument of some kind that doubles as a weapon.
Something homemade for sure, I would guess.
Yeah,
So not like a sword or anything, but maybe like a staff or I don't know.
I kind of like a staff. If it was
Somebody
like a
asked,
walking cane that it was actually her weapon all along.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I kind of like that idea.
Somebody asked, how do you get the skin to look so realistic?
Add in different hues and blend them in. So, hold on, I gotta sneeze really quick. Oh,
Oh,
okay.
somebody even suggested an axe. Oh, okay.
Oh, an axe would be good too. I would probably want to make it more hidden or something where it was more covert. So that's why I kind of like the walking stick that is actually like her weapon.
Mm-hmm.
But for skin tones, I would definitely, well, one, read James Gurney's Color and Light, and then really, you can even look through it just for the skin topic ones, because the one that really stuck and resonated with me was how he talked about facial regions and how the middle area is more red, top area is more yellow, and the bottom area is more blue. And I've kind of added that to my spectrum of how I work in colors for my characters ever since, and it really does boost out up into them. So I would definitely recommend that. But for the most part, if you're only using a couple colors for the skin, it probably isn't looking all that great. So be aware of how many colors you're adding to the skin without overdoing it though, because you definitely can make a face look unrealistic by adding two colors or too many colors. But you definitely want to add enough where you're boosting the underneath skin tones and making the flesh look more like flesh rather than a flat skin tone altogether. I guess, I mean, Dee, what would you say about skin tones and how to make it look more believable?
Um, I would say the highlights are definitely
Hmm.
like one of the big things. Other than the colors, which you already said, I think even when I was working on like the nose exercise, it was always the highlight that was like actually made it look like something that could be real.
And I do agree with you that you can definitely overdo highlights.
Oh yeah, of course.
Because I know I've definitely done that in the past, and it's a learning experience. But you don't want to make everything look too shiny, or else the skin might start looking like plastic, or even
Mm.
like it's wet. And I'm sure that's not the impression that you're trying to give off with skin. Okay, let's see. Where should I focus on next here? So I kind of like the what we're doing here, and you can kind of see how what I'm talking more about with the lighting, where there isn't one where you're like you know exactly where and the direction is coming for the light, but you kind of have a general idea that yeah, it's coming from the side, and there's that cast shadow from the head, but for the most part it's pretty pillow shaded, and that's not to say that that's a bad thing. So you can see how it works, but you want to make sure that you understand lighting and that you're not just pillow shading because it's easier because you don't know how to do it correctly.
I've got some more suggestions for her weapon.
Oh
Somebody
yeah,
said
let's
a
hear 'em.
piece of wood, a ladle, and a frying pan.
A ladle. Oh, a frying pan would be a little funny. I'm trying to think.
That
I always
reminds me
thought a
of,
frying pan would be a great weapon because that would really hurt. It's such a blunt object that if you were hit
yeah.
hard enough with it, I mean, that could knock you out easy.
Oh, what about a shovel?
That's my main character's weapon.
Oh, true.
I know, shovel's my favorite weapon ever. It has so many uses, but I really do like the idea of some kind of a walking cane slash weapon.
Hmm.
Okay, now I'm thinking for her chest area, I absolutely don't want to make it like, I don't want to appeal and have it be a sexual attraction. That's not what I'm trying to do here. But for the skin, I definitely want to give it, a realistic pop without it looking busty. So I'm going to be going through and adding just a slight sag to the skin here. And then on top of that, I'm going to put some jewelry or something to kind of coat it, give it more interest. And maybe like this ruffle right here is casting a shadow on the skin.
Do you have any tips for shading hard surfaces?
Yes, hard surfaces is very dependent on the light source. So for that, I mean, you could still pillow shade, but if you wanted to really make a hard surface look believable, use hard defined lines and really focus on where your lighting is coming from and reflect that as much as possible in your hard surface object. And even if it's been like if it was a shovel that's been used for 30 years and it's got some dents and whatever to it, it's still considered kind of hard surface. It almost passes a little bit into the organic side of how you would shade it, but for the most part, you would just look at those bends and all those angles, and then add in little lighting nuances here and there to give it that effect. So I'm just adding more kind of definition to the frill here. So now the area that I have the cast shadow that's underneath her head, I'm going to try to continue that shadow line onto the frill here. So right now it looks like the frill shadow line, you can kind of see where it is, but it's a bit too far out for my liking. So I'm going to push it in just using a lighter color and drawing right on top until I get that shadow line that is more coherent with that initial shadow line from the head. So now for her hair here, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a soft edge brush. So this brush right here. And I'm going to be making a new layer for this as well. But I'm going to be edging out the outline of the hair. And you'll see why. Because then I'm going to do more defined hair, more in the foreground, and then lay it kind of on top of that fuzzy area near the edge. So I could even grab this brush here. So oftentimes I'm trying to direct the focus of the eye towards the face. So the hair that's closer to the face, I'll usually give more definition, and then as it gets farther away, I'll usually tend to make it less defined. And here I'm using the 4-point brush, which you can also download on our brushes page. And this is really just to give some direction to the hair itself. But I think for the most part, I'm going to leave the hair alone. And a lot of it is because I would want to spend more time on making this hair look more frizzled and unkempt. But that would take up a bit too much of our time. And since the stream is coming to an end soon, I don't want to take the time doing it on the hair as much as I would rather it on other areas.
Somebody suggested a animal companion.
The what?
Like an animal companion for her.
An animal companion.
Yeah, like a bird.
A bird?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like
I think a bird would make it more pirate, sky pirate, yeah.
I think if it was something more furry, I'd be more okay with it.
Mm-hmm. A dog. A bulldog.
A little bulldog. Yeah, that'd be cute. It would definitely be something to reflect her personality as well. If it was like maybe it would complement it because of the age, but then it would contrast it because maybe it was like a really sluggish, slow and lazy bulldog where she's more of an up and atom type of character.
Mm-hmm.
Say that other side of the face is definitely not nearly as worked in as the face in the foreground. And sometimes you can get away with that if you're on a time constraint where you direct the eye to different areas that are finished and where there's areas that are more unfinished. If you just don't have time to finish them, you can leave it at that as long as you have an area that's really finished and refined that will keep the interest there.
Yep, some more animal suggestions.
Let's hear them.
Lizard.
A lizard?
Yeah, a lizard, a turtle, and a ferret.
I kind of like the idea of a lizard. That reminds me of my friend Angela from school. I don't know how a turtle would work.
Yeah.
mean, I love turtles, but I don't know how that would work in this scenario. And then what was the last one?
A ferret.
Oh, a ferret. Yeah, that kind of works. Yeah, so this is actually a pretty solid start for what I wanted for this live stream, to kind of show you guys how to take something from grayscale and add color to it. And before we end the stream, I want to go ahead and show you really quick what we got. But before I do that, I'll do a before and after of what she looked like with just the grayscale. So here we go. And then with the color addition we did today. So I like what the direction it's going in. I will say I would like maybe everything to have a more contrast to it. So let me go ahead really quick. I'm going to merge all the layers together. I'm going to do a quick adjustment of levels and see where that takes us. You can see a slight difference there, and then maybe I'll do another one. Multiply definitely makes it crazy dark. But then I would be able to add more highlights on top of it and really pop out the facial structure. So you can see just the minor difference that that gives us. But I think even that is a bit too dark. And then from here I would just work up what I've been doing of more rendering and polishing it as much as I could. But for now, I'm going to call this part of the live stream done. And really quick, and actually, is there any other questions before I go ahead and...
Joe asked what her profession is.
Badass.
Okay.
I would say she is a traveling merchant, but she deals with more illegal merchandise. It didn't start that way, but that's kind of what she grew into as she got older. And that's kind of why she's more rough looking, and she has this tough skin and more or less a tough exterior, and I really want that to come across in her outfit. So as we finish her up next week, I'm hoping that's the impression that I kind of gave off with her.
And the streams are saved, right?
Yes, and if you missed either part 1 or 2, or want to watch one even before this, you can definitely watch them on our YouTube page, and I believe they are also now on our Google Hangout Plus pages as well. Okay, so really quick, I want to show you guys. So last weekend, me and Deandra had a concept cookie booth at the Anime Central Convention in Rosemont, Illinois, and we got to meet Purple Kecleon, or Mel, and I bought one of her prints. And here it is. I know I'm going to get a massive glare from my window, but hope you guys can all see this. And it's funny because I don't even watch the anime that this is based on, but her use of color is so strong and bold that sometimes it's not the subject matter that may entrance you, or like capture your attention. It's the use of color or the composition or the style or something, and you'll realize that more and more as you look at more art. But I definitely wanted you guys to know that artists are just like you. I had a good conversation with her, and she's just an awesome person. And I think if you really are interested in artists that you are following, I mean, look up what conventions they'll be at and go and meet them. It's a really cool experience to, find out that they're just people, and they're just as happy sometimes to meet you as you are them. So thanks again for watching, guys. We do these every Wednesday at 2 p.m. here on this Google Hangout page. And next week will be the final and last part, and it'll be kind of the last one before our summer extravaganza of tutorials. And that's where, if you're a Citizen member, we'll have a new tutorial every single week from a new AAA author. And I'm really excited to share these out with you. Deandra and I have been reviewing the tutorials, and there are some really great ones. And I think if you were kind of on the edge of whether or not you wanted to be a Citizen member for, this would be the time to hop over. And I want to thank you guys for coming to this live stream, and hopefully we'll see you next week as we finish it off. So thanks again, and Deandra, say bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.